Evening. This is John Farmer, Chair of the Planning Board. Welcome to our September 28th, 2021 Planning Board meeting. Let me just do the roll call of the members, please. Jim Sears.
Present.
Peg Zielinski.
Present.
Luke George.
Here.
Great. Tori Adler.
Present.
And Jean Hartnett.
Present.
Excellent. For this meeting tonight, we're convening by Microsoft Teams app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join in on the conversation. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body will be shown during this transmission. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. Just a few meeting ground rules. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, question, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, we have established an email address for public comments @danversmass.gov. This email address is shown online with the streaming of this meeting. Residents may email comments and they will be read out loud after the staff has confirmed your name and address. All emails must contain the date and phrase planning board meeting in the subject line. Finally, each vote taken tonight will be conducted by a roll call vote. So we have two items on the agenda. The first is Whipple Hill subdivision, Sandpiper Circle, Carroll Way, a request by Whipple Hill LLC for a reduction of performance guarantee for completion of site improvements for the definitive subdivision known as Whipple Hill, Assessors Map 42, Lot 8A. So, Josh, is there someone?
Yeah, yes, John. Just to let you know, they actually late in this afternoon they actually continued that item to the next planning board meeting.
That makes it easy. So we'll continue to the next meeting. All right, so the main item for tonight is the zoning bylaw changes. This is a continuation of the public hearing. An overview from the staff of the proposed zoning amendments for the fall town meeting for November 15th, 2021. This is a public hearing process for the zoning amendments that were advertised on August 26, 2021. The public notice for the proposed amendments can be found in the office of the town clerk. So David, I'll turn it over to you. I guess what we're trying to accomplish, since there's really two sets of articles that we're going to be reviewing. The first are the 7 holdovers from the prior discussion with the public that we did not conduct a town meeting because of COVID. So, and then we'll get into the new items for discussion that we got a brief overview by David last meeting. So, David, I guess I turn it to you, or Aaron, or Josh, whoever wants to walk through the next steps.
Okay, I can lead that charge. If you just give me one moment to share my screen. I have a short PowerPoint going over this year's articles, but we're going to start with last year's articles as the chair had mentioned. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes.
All right. So again, as a brief outline, we'll run through the articles that are held over from the canceled town meeting November 2020. We'll revisit the 2021 proposed updates and then welcome any discussion that may happen. So I showed this slide at the last meeting as well. This is just a listing of all of the articles that were held over from last year on the left-hand side of the screen. All the articles up for this fall 2021 on the right-hand side of the screen. Additionally, I should point out there's two general bylaws up for discussion at this town meeting. They're not zoning bylaws. So they don't need to go through the same process as zoning articles, but they affect the demolition delay bylaw, which is administered by the Preservation Commission, and the wetlands protection bylaw administered by the Conservation Commission. So jumping right into last year's articles from November 2020, starting off at section 2 of the zoning bylaw is administration. Changes to this article really cover a severability clause added in, which we do not have in the existing bylaw. The powers and duties of the planning board, adding in the fact that they are allowed to grant special permits, which was pretty key. The zoning board has that already listed in the bylaw, but the planning board did not, and the powers for site plan review. There was also updates to allow administratively changes to headings, typos, and pagination. So if there's a reference to a table that wasn't correct, rather than wait potentially up to a full year to come back to town meeting, we'd be able to change that to reflect the correct reference. Moving along from that one, changes to site plan review section 4. We covered this one pretty well in depth, I think, last fall. But just as a reminder, this is more or less a rewrite of the existing bylaw, taking a lot of the good stuff out of that bylaw and placing those in the planning board's regulations in terms of how to file, what types of files you do need to file to go through site plan review, and sort of collapsing the current 4-tiered system we have into a 2-tiered system. And one of the main changes that looks like an omission from this section is moving the table of off-street parking, which is currently in section 4, to its own section to make it apply to the rest of the zoning bylaw. So it could be argued as it stands now that the table of off-street parking only applies to projects that have to go for site plan review, which not every project does. So we want to make sure we cover our bases and make sure that the parking table applies to all sites within town where applicable. So moving through that. Cbzd Cleanup. This is the character-based zoning districts introduced in February 2020, sections 18 through 22 of the zoning bylaw. This really is similar to the administration article about correcting table headings, internal references, and typographical errors. There were some changes to the parking table in this section, which I think are outside of the scope of the administrative changes in section 2. The most notable one was switching the restaurant required parking. We have it transposed and it's listed as a higher factor for those restaurants located near a municipal parking area. And we actually want that to be the exact opposite of what's in there now. That was just a typo. And adding a parking factor for multifamily. It should be the same as multi-use. It was just dropped from the table. So it currently looks like there is not a parking factor for multifamily, when in fact it should be the same for multi-use. This bylaw, the section of this bylaw is pretty long. I think it's about 70 pages. So it looks like there's a lot going on, but really it's mostly internal references and typographical errors throughout those pages. So there's a lot of pages with very little actual substantive change. I just wanted to point out the parking factors because that kind of is the biggest thing. Moving right along. Cluster developments, it's currently section 33 in the zoning bylaw. This is what the state has recently changed to open space residential developments. So the state has updated some sections of 40A, including the special permit section, which allow this type of development. We were a little ahead of the game, I guess, last year, unbeknownst to us, but it's an overhaul of the existing bylaw. And really, we're just attempting to make it, as I say in the slide, geometrically and financially feasible, meaning that the existing bylaw was kind of drafted when there were larger sites to develop in town. Now most of our subdividable parcels or even assemblages of parcels are much smaller than the current cluster development bylaw really allow to be pulled off. You really kind of need a 20-acre site or something larger to use this section of the bylaw to its fullest, and we want to make it, essentially palatable to a developer, meaning financially feasible. They make it be that there's a reason for you to do it, as opposed to sort of just, we hope that you do from an environmental standpoint. So that was a rewrite, but I'm happy to take any questions on that one at the end. I know we spent a lot of time on that last fall as well. We have a fair amount of updates to the definition section of section 40. Mainly it's adding definitions that aren't there. So I highlight here principal use. So we have a definition for accessory use, but we don't have one for principal permissible use. We wanted to add some things like that they're referenced throughout the bylaw, but may not actually have a definition once you flip to the back of the book. Also removing duplicate items. So we had I think there's 3 definitions of open space. We're trying to collapse that down to one to make sure when it's referenced that somebody using the bylaw knows which one we're trying to go for and how to use that. And then making any other corrections. I found a few errors listed in the definition section. So we did add a few things. I don't think it's anything too startling to anybody, but I'm happy to take questions at the end of the presentation. So those are the holdovers from last year. Moving along to the stuff for 2021, I had mentioned this at the.
David, do you mind if I just interrupt? Because I want to try to get this into the public record
Sure.
before we go to new ones. That there was a public hearing that took place on September 22nd, 2020, at the planning board meeting, and then there was follow-up conversations with the public on October 13th and October 27th. And then the public hearing was closed on the 27th from the planning board's perspective, and the planning board unanimously voted favorable recommendations of these changes. Then the select board did their meetings as well as the finance committee, and it was all ready to go for that November 2020 town meeting, and then obviously COVID put that on hold. So I think that's important that the record shows that there was multiple meetings, and I think everyone other than Gene, who's brand new, as on the board, participated in those meetings. So, so I don't mean to interrupt you, David. I just wanted to put that on the record.
No, that's absolutely okay, and that's spot on too. Thank you very much for referencing that. I sometimes get lost in the substance and forget where we're going, so thanks very much. I can jump back in to the updates for this year. I did run through these briefly on September 14th of this year. It was more of just an overview. The presentation for this meeting isn't that much different, but given that we advertised this meeting a bit more heavily than we did the last one, I'll just go through this fairly quickly. We sent out a memorandum earlier in the year stating that the categories for changes this year really fall under state or case law changes or updates that are needed. That would be things like the FEMA floodplain changes, which we can discuss later on. Chronic problems or nuisance or butter issues, so things people constantly call our office about, or the building commissioner's office, or both, or town hall in general. Things like outdoor storage areas or storage containers. And then board and staff requests, technical corrections, and internal consistency. So mostly everything else falls under that category. That's not a nuisance or a case law change, but can move along from here. The first thing up was storage containers. I think I showed this picture last time. The main complaint we receive for storage containers, this would fall into the nuisance category, is for residential use. We don't get too many complaints on the commercial or industrial side. So the way the bylaw is set up today, more or less you can have a storage container similar to this one on a residential property with no time limitation on how long it can be there. We're proposing a 60-day time period where you can just have your storage container and have at it, do what you got to do, move things out, move them in, whether families are moving or doing a small construction project, you can use that as much as you'd like. The second stage of that would be between 60 and 180 days. We would basically require you to get a building permit. The zoning bylaw can't push you to the building permit, but effectively the way it's written, it says they could be counted as accessory structures, which is intimating that you probably should go talk to the building inspector if it's going to be there for 6 months. And then after that, you can still have a storage container. It would just be subject to a special permit through the Zoning Board of Appeals. So it's not that you can't have them, it's just a little bit more framed out than now, where you can have them pretty much for as long as you want to have them on your residential property. The limitation for commercial and industrial properties was up to 6 months. So you can have one up to 6 months, just do whatever you want to do with it. Same thing for construction projects or moving excess supply or equipment. After 6 months or 180 days, really, we'd like you to go for a special permit for that, because it's most likely becoming more of a permanent feature of the site than it would be for less than that time period. Moving on to Outdoor storage. So right now the zoning bylaw, and I think I mentioned this last time as well, we have it as a category outdoor storage / display / sales. We get a lot of calls about outdoor storage, and it's sort of hard for staff to categorize, well, what exactly is it? What are you doing? And should you be doing it where it's located? So the changes to the bylaw for this year attempt to break out those three things into actual storage, which could be something like you're seeing on the screen now, long-term storage of goods that are not accessible by the public. This is just excess materials that, you know, a gentleman or a woman with a forklift would go over and move these things around once they need to go into the store for sale. Outdoor display, which is something similar to what we're showing here, where an item can be shown for display and for purchase, but most of the time folks are not going to the store to purchase that snowblower that you can see on the screen. They're going to go inside and say, hey, I'd like to buy a snowblower. Can you help me with that? And somebody may go to an outdoor storage area or somewhere else in the building and get them what they need. And we're also differentiating that from an outdoor sales area, which is very much things like potted plants or shovels or pool noodles, whatever it may be. We think it'll probably move seasonally, where you actually just walk by, pick up whatever you need, and then go pay for it. So really, this is helping staff quite a bit and the building commissioner differentiate those three types of things. And we're just saying, you know, show us where you're going to locate them. We'd really like to see that. And then that way, if something is askew, we can go out and actually say, you know, this isn't your outdoor sales area. This is supposed to be for outdoor storage. You know, please move it or do whatever you have to do. Assuming everybody plays by the rules, it should all work out. But again, we're not saying you can't do these things at all. We absolutely think that you can and should for where it's appropriate. And then any other overages, if you need an excess of what is allowed, you can again go ask for relief from the zoning board on those things. So I'll move on from outdoor storage. I'm sort of pairing these two items together. We have them right now as separate articles. That could change, but they're called dwelling unit conversion, which is a current special permit in the zoning bylaw, and then multifamily, which only appears actually in tables 1 and 2 of the zoning bylaw. It's not really referenced anywhere else. And I think I mentioned last time, these are things specifically allowed in R1, R2, and R3, our traditional single-family zoning districts. So I think the overall philosophy behind this was to concentrate our efforts to more of a planning exercise, which I think we did with the downtown, and we're likely to be pivoting to the what we're calling the Endicott corridor, or the commercial 3 area. Again, more of a planned out approach to adding residential density and residential units where there's infrastructure and kind of where we want some activity, and trying to limit some of the scattershot development that's sort of happening around, which is another item that we frequently get. I wouldn't call them nuisance complaints. The actors are going through the permitting system as they should, but often we get calls, you know, from a house in an R2 or an R3 area saying, you know, why is there a 2-family or a 3-family or a 4-family locating next to me, which is allowed now under the existing bylaw. So the proposal is to maybe limit some of the scattershot development, of which I think I showed this last time and said there's quite a number of it in town. Again, all of the units that are out there today would be pre-existing non-conforming if this article went forward. Nothing would change with those. Those can be used, and they probably will be from now until long after all of us are done serving the town. But I wanted to point out, I think I did this last time as well, all the areas shown in light tan on the screen are R1, 2, or 3 zoning districts. The darker orange is everything else, meaning commercial, and the light blue is existing multifamily districts. So we do currently have multifamily districts. That's a conversation we could have later on about if we want to revisit those, should they be expanded? As I mentioned, you know, perhaps there's some room for expansion down on Endicott Street. But as it exists, there's a lot of other development throughout the town that's not really concentrated into the areas we're trying to focus on for planning purposes. And we can revisit this later on as well when we take questions. Moving through this, we have changes for Efflues, which is section 9 of the bylaw. That's a special permit or by right option, which we're not proposing to change, and planned developments. So the changes to Efflues really come from the question of how are we measuring those. So there's a current limit in the zoning bylaw of 750 square feet. There are some design standards and criteria, but there's not a lot of those in the existing book. So one thing we want to do is change existing policy or things that are routinely looked for from either the zoning board or potentially the building commissioner, make those part of the bylaw to say, to alert people who are applying that, we're going to be looking for these things, rather than alert them to the fact that the last second that their design may not be quite right. Updates to some design considerations, and then really calculating what counts towards that 750 square feet. There could be, any number of changes on this going forward, depending on how the board feels. But as it stands now, we think the changes that we're making do clarify what we're trying to do in terms of how to measure and what should really be in that book quite a bit. I do think that, perhaps in the future, this bylaw itself could be revisited and have some more tweaks. But for now, I think this would help at least the staff and probably the zoning board really figure out what part of the home is the EFLA, where's the EFLA supposed to be, and if there's anything that the applicant should know beforehand that is routinely looked for, we can flesh that out ahead of time. And again, hopefully get these things moving through and get built. The next section, we talked about this a little bit last time. I think this is probably a larger policy discussion that we can have too, but it's dealing with use variances and plan developments. So the proposal really for tonight is to replace the allowance of use variances, which MGL Chapter 40A more or less has discontinued the practice of. We're grandfathered into that, meaning that we had use variances allowed before 1976, as it says in MGL, but we don't want to eliminate any option for any type of development completely. Obviously, we want, as an economic development office and a planning office, for things to go forward. So we're proposing a change to allow planned developments. So on the left-hand side of your screen, you can see communities that are still allowing use variances. I think I mentioned last time I went through over 100 zoning bylaws, not tip to tail, but I spent a lot of time looking through. Couldn't find that many communities still doing use variances. We are one of those. But I came up with a handful, kind of just off the top of my head on the right-hand side, that do plan developments. There are more than this, but these are the ones that I actively knew about, just for some comparison's sake. And essentially, plan developments, what it would allow you to do is to ask for uses, dimensional sizes, and the character of a site to be what you want it to develop it into. So effectively, the developer or the applicant is planning a development for their needs, probably for the next business cycle, probably longer than that. So it gives them an opportunity to, if they own a larger parcel, for sure, to have multiple options and ask for multiple uses of things that might be compatible on that site or things that might be complementary. Whereas now, the way it exists, I'm showing commercial 3 right here, but in most of this zone, residential development is not allowed. If that was incorporated into this, you could develop a site like the one being shown with things like flex space, office space, some retail space, and residential all as one package. I think we had questions from the last time of how would this work, or I at least got one from the selectmen. So I wanted to point out the current development process. Assuming the use isn't allowed in the zone, you'd have to go for a variance for that. You may have to go for a special permit, either to the planning board or the zoning board. You'd probably have to go for site plan approval. You'd also take a trip to the Conservation Commission if it's wetlands jurisdictional. There's a couple other boards too, depending on where you're located in town. It could be historic in nature, or there could be a historic building on the site, in which case you'd have to go to Preservation Commission as well. So what we're hoping to do is to get all of those boards, or at least a few members of those boards, at the table early on, to essentially vet a proposal from a developer, give feedback ahead of time, and at that point, give not necessarily the green light, meaning your developer's going to happen, but a pretty good indication of that the bodies that exist in town are, or at least a few members of them, are happy with the development and should proceed to the next stage. So the way it would work is the applicant would submit a preliminary plan. It could be vetted by this commission, which we're calling the Plan Development Review Committee, again, consisting of a few members of each of the permit granting authorities where they have jurisdiction. So we're not going to make the Historic District Commission come out for a project that's not in the Historic District. The applicant would meet with that committee, similar to the way we do informal meetings now. The recommendation from that committee would go to the planning board, who would vet the definitive plan. And in that way, it's not that different from a subdivision where you have a preliminary process and a definitive process. And then that recommendation would ultimately go to town meeting for a vote. The way this is set up. It's working in 135-day timelines. So that's about every 4.5 months. Somebody could apply, assuming that we'd have an annual town meeting and a fall town meeting. It wouldn't preclude another town meeting happening at a different time. We haven't really contemplated that yet. I think the 2 town meeting cycle would be enough to cover what we need to do. And I did just want to point out, we had some questions of, that seems like an awfully long timeline, but there's several projects that we've had recently that have been in the wash, going through the different various boards for, in some cases, 24 months, but certainly 18 months. And quite a few of them at the end of the day ended up without a project because they failed to receive an approval in one way or another at one of the various boards along the way. So we're hoping that if this process goes forward, at least at the outset of it, early on, for short money spent on the preliminary plan, the applicant could get feedback to, show them or indicate to them which way they think it's going to go. Move on from that one. That was a long one, but up next is inclusionary housing. So the Affordable Housing Trust had asked the Planning Division to look at the existing, believe it's called the multi-family affordability provision. It's in Section 30. We're proposing to make that its own section. It is quite buried in the special permit section. We wanted to pull it out, make it applicable to all zones in town, and call it inclusionary housing. It's really a codifying affordable housing provision that we've introduced in the downtown area last February, and make that applicable to other developments elsewhere in the community. So for more or less for smaller projects, it would be a 10% ask. Most of the time that results in a fractional unit, which ultimately results in only a payment to the Affordable Housing Trust, not necessarily a full unit, though we'd always take an affordable unit if we can get it. And then larger projects of a 12.5% ask for affordable housing. And that's fairly common of what the 12.5% of what we've been seeing for larger projects lately. That's what was ultimately received for the 20 Locust project. And I think that that's probably the going rate in most communities going forward around the Commonwealth, and that it's more than 10%, so it keeps us a little bit above, and it moves the needle a little bit forward above the 10% that's required for the subsidized housing inventory. And for the next one, I'm going to turn this over to Aaron Henry if he's there. This is his bailiwick.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. We again did talk about this at the last meeting, so I'll try to keep this brief and obviously available for questions should there be any. Again, civic space is the idea that there are a number of parcels throughout town that contribute to the character of the town and in its civic life, and that could be an institution, a school, an open space, any number of things that kind of contribute to the views. As you drive around town, these are the things that make our town. The exercise that we've gone through, and this was an article we did discuss last year in the run up to the 2020 for a couple of reasons, many of them technical. We weren't able to bring it forward. And as the slides suggest, that second bullet was there was some data, we needed to do some data cleanup, and that started to kind of focus around the existing zoning districts, and maybe this seemed like an exercise that we should also start to look at some of those boundaries and start to clean up some of the data that we were looking at. So there's a part 2 to this, but David, if you can move ahead. Last time, one of the confusing things, and this was on me, I do apologize. The zoning map that I was referencing against the proposed map weren't using the same color scheme, and that made a difficult concept perhaps harder to follow along. So we spent some time since the last meeting correcting that. So David, if you can do a quick flip and back maybe once or twice just to try to demonstrate the change. So the proposed zoning map now shows all the zoning districts in the same exact color as the existing zoning map. The proposed map, we can hold here for a minute. Towards the top left, you'll see the new zoning districts that are proposed as part of the civic space proposal. Utilities and rights of way, background in gray. institutional uses and open space uses. And as you can see, when you kind of look at the map and compare the two, it's quite a bit of change. And that basically we feel that this is a more appropriate zoning category for these parcels based on what they contribute to the community and what those uses are. So we've done that homework, and I'm sure there's other questions on this, but I just wanted to make sure that the board saw that, you know, we heard you and knew that the map was a little hard to digest. I think if you've had access to this online, you can zoom way in and you'll see the parcels again. So if there's any specific questions, hopefully we can literally dive in to the map if you had particular questions. But in some of these cases, you know, it caused us to try to figure out where district lines should be versus the old school methodology of the existing map, which, you know, just says 125 feet from the street, cutting many parcels in half. And so this really clarifies, I think, the zoning bylaw, the zoning district boundaries, and also puts forward this new concept of institutional and open space zoning, which we've also learned since then. And this, I'll end on this. We once had, the planning staff found a very old zoning map in the basement, and we brought it up and are hanging it upstairs, although maybe it came down this week. But and interestingly enough, they once had this type of zoning in place. And for some odd reason, we moved away from it. So it's just like everything else. It's cool again. So we're trying to propose it. So I think that's it, David, for civic space. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Aaron. I just wanted to point out to the board, we did advertise one article that after quite a bit of hemming and hawing, I don't think is going to make it to prime time, which was movie filming and TV production. We had heard some feedback from some of this board based on a recent film that was shot in Danvers, maybe to tighten up the process a little bit or figure out, you know, how exactly to make that work a little bit better. We were working with a consultant on that as part of a small grant we received from the state. We received materials back, but after we took a look at what we got, it seems like it would result in an overhaul of the process to make it more of a licensing issue with the Board of Selectmen. And with the limited time we had left before town meeting, I didn't think it was appropriate to throw a whole nother license at them that they weren't familiar with and frankly probably weren't prepared for or didn't see coming. That is something I do hope to revisit in the future, but at the time where we're at now, we sort of just ran out of time on that one, which is unfortunate, but hopefully we come back with something better than what we have now and a lot more functional and easier for applicants to use. I did want to point out, I know I ran through this fairly quickly. I'd like to get to your comments, meaning the boards or the public's, but all of this material is posted on the town's website at danversma.gov/zoning articles 2021. And yes, there are hyphens between those things. When you make a space and a hyperlink, apparently it autofills with hyphens. So I apologize for that, but everything is up on the website, and soon there should be a link to it on the front page of the town's website. So hopefully everyone is able to find that. And if not, just give us a call and we can get the material to you, or you can come visit us in our office and take a look. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I'm happy to go back to this presentation if we need to take a further look at anything. But for now, I'm done talking. I'll let the board talk.
All right, thanks, David. So just to organize our conversation tonight, what I'd like to propose is we kind of break it into 4 parts. And, you know, I welcome your feedback. The first part will be the holdover articles, to have the board ask questions if there are any, and then we'll open it to the public. And then I want to carve out the plan development and civic space separate in the new articles, and then talk about the new articles. So we can keep focused on what I think a lot of the conversation may be. But how does that sound to my fellow board members? Does that work? Okay. So why don't, and Peg, well, I'll start with you on most of these, since, you know, you won't be here for the next meeting, but any questions on the holdover articles from you, Peg.
On the 2020s,
Yeah,
articles, no. I spoke to David. He answered a number of my questions. We already went through this last year and approved it, so I have no questions.
Jim, questions on the holdover articles?
I'm all set on those, John.
Lou?
Yeah, I actually sat down with David as well as Josh and went over these at length. So I don't have any questions. They answered all my questions.
Tori, holdover articles?
No, I felt like we discussed this last year.
Yeah.
Gene, I know I'm putting you on the spot. I mean, this is all new to you, but did you have a chance to look at some of the holdover articles, and do you have any questions for the staff?
Yeah, I looked at them, and I don't have any questions.
Good. I don't have any questions, and so I'll turn it to the public. David, anyone from the public have questions on the holdover articles from 2020?
Sure. It looks like we have a couple of members of the public, and Mr. Bernazzani, and I know Attorney McCann is calling in, and I thought Matt Duggan was here.
Yep.
So
Yep, he's
I guess I'd start with you, Matthew. Mr. Duggan, sorry. Do you have any comments on 2020 articles?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Field. So this is Matthew Duggan, Selectman. So can you just list what the holdover articles are? I have the information, but I don't have those broken out. So can you just, for myself and for others, can you just go through the holdover articles again? There's 6 of them.
Sure, I can take that, Mr. Chair, if you'd like.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Just let me get through that section. Sure, there's 6 of them. It's changes, 7 of them, including an owner's petition, which we hope to discuss at the next planning board meeting for 490 and 500 Maple Street. It's administrative, which is section 2 of the zoning bylaw, civic space, which we are effectively discussing tonight as a 2021 zoning change, because I think last year there was a lot of conversation around it. We sort of said, perhaps it's not ready for this year. Let's take another crack at it in the future. Cluster developments was a holdover from last year. Updates to character-based zoning districts, site plan review, and then changes to the definition section.
Okay, so let's
So
see.
7 total, which includes an owner's petition.
Okay, so it's Article H is the character-based. Article I is civic space. J is cluster development. K is definitions. And can you just say what the other ones were? Site plan review, right? That one?
Correct. Yep.
Article N.
And definitions.
Definitions is K, okay.
And just for reference, so what Mr. Duggan is referring to, we had assigned these articles alphabet letters for the time being. These will get article numbers going forward after the warrant is actually produced, but we were trying to have a way to keep track of them.
Okay, so I have 5, and so I have character-based, civic space, cluster, definitions, site plan review. There's 2 more?
Administration, which is section 2, and then an owner's petition for Outer Maple Street.
Okay. All right, I don't, I guess for the civic space, that was the one that Mr. Henry just reviewed with us with the colored maps?
Yes, that was the one with the
Okay,
maps,
so-
yes.
So just, I know I had listened to a presentation for this recently. What does that buy the town in terms of, for example, for open space to more clearly define those areas? Is there some type of grant money, or does the state reward us for carving those areas out?
I guess I can try to answer that, John, if that's okay.
Yeah, so, Mr. Dunn, if you don't mind, what I'm trying to do is do last year's first and then come to this year's. If you can hold that question because we're gonna get to the civic space pretty quickly. So
Oh, I thought that was a holdover. I'm sorry. Okay.
that's a new one, right, Aaron? 2020?
Well, we talked about it last year. It wasn't in the final packet. So, but we continue to work on it. So it's kind of got an asterisk on whether it's a holdover or not.
Right.
We certainly
Okay.
developed it, but I can answer the question when we get to it, John.
Yeah, that's fine, Mr. Chairman. So I think just in general, these are kind of almost like housekeeping items at this point, right? We're clearing up some ambiguities and just maybe, I think some of these have, we've gotten some guidance from the state where our verbiage didn't meet kind of what the current standards are. So is that kind of an accurate overview of my perspective?
David, I'd let you answer that better,
Sure.
but I think that's the impression, yes.
Yep, no, you're
Yeah.
spot on, John. It's a
Okay.
lot of housekeeping.
All right, that's all I have for the moment, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the time.
Okay. We'll get back to it. So, any other public comments that we're aware of on the 2020 holdover articles?
If I could just interject, John, I believe that Attorney McCann wanted to discuss the Outer Maple Street citizens petition. She indicated to me that she just wanted to briefly discuss that. She is on her phone. Attorney McCann, if you can hear her, you'd like to talk about it.
Yes.
I think now would be the time. Yep.
Okay, thank you. If you can hear me. I did want to address this, but I believe I just heard Mr. Fields say that this was going to be discussed at the next planning board meeting. So if that's the case, I'll hold my my comments and presentation until that meeting. I just didn't want it to get lost if it was supposed to be discussed tonight.
Okay, that's fine. So we can allocate
good.
time for the next meeting.
Okay.
That's not a problem.
So that will be on for the next meeting.
Yeah, that particular holdover article.
Okay, so that will be on the meeting of October 11, 12, October 12th.
Correct.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. I just didn't want it to get missed. Okay, thank you.
No problem. All right, so if there's no other questions on or comments on the holdover articles, I'd like to go to the next section, which is the plan development. So Peg, why don't I start with you on this particular concept? Clearly it's something new. I would expect there's some comments around the plan development approach.
Well, I'm looking at my notes and trying to find.
Well, in the memo that we all got, that with the Select Board Finance Committee and the Planning Board, it's Article O on page 2, I believe. Plus, it's also in the maybe this is what we can do, David. If we can at least the slide on that particular one, we can. You don't mind sharing your screen, so them provide a conversation.
Can do.
There we go.
Oh, okay. Is this change? I don't really have any problems with that. Are you showing a slide of the Endicott? Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what the slide is of as an example.
It's the Liberty Tree Mall area. Obviously, this is not.
I don't have a problem with updating. I think this is a way of updating what we've had, allowing things that are being done today. You know, rather than what was done in the past where we segregated commercial and residential. Many times they're mixed, and this will include, you know, mixed development. So I don't think I had a lot of questions. I'm looking at my notes right now. I don't have too many questions on that. So, oh, that's yeah, nope. I'm looking at something else. I think I'm pretty well you know, it may need to be tweaked, but I'm pretty much in favor of this.
Okay, Jim, do you have any questions on plan development and use variance zoning?
Well, this is kind of a new thing. We haven't really had a lot of discussion on it as far as the Liberty Tree Mall.
Oh, I think that was just kind of an example of some larger parcels in town that could have a multitude of uses, but it doesn't need to be specific to this area. It would essentially just be a new permit typology that could be used by anybody. This just happens to be a slide from the feasibility study that we're trying to conduct for that area.
So we're just carving out the ability to do that type of zoning in town.
Yeah, it would open up the floor to have an applicant or a developer propose, you know, a single use or a number of uses on any of their parcels in different varying levels of density or height, whatever it is that they feel that they need to do to achieve a productive development on that site. I think this area of town was a good choice just to show, only in that, you know, the Market Basket and the BJ's currently have a lot going on, but they may have different ideas for their overall sites, their large sites, and there might be more of a vision that the applicant has there that they could actually get all done at the same time, kind of wholesale, and set themselves up for the next business cycle.
Darren, do you want to chime in on this?
Do you have a minimum lot size on that?
There's not currently.
Okay.
Aaron, did you have a question, or do you want to add something?
Well, while Jim's thinking of the next one, I guess I'll just chime in. I think one of the concepts with plan development is state law already affords property owners the right to request new zoning from town meeting or from the legislative branch. I think what this proposal tries to do is put some guideposts up on that and adds a little bit of preliminary planning, where the proposal that David's got would bring various committees together to kind of vet a proposal. So right now, and again, since we're looking at this, and this is just an example, the Liberty Tree Mall area, let's say this was all under one unified ownership, or at least all the owners got together and agreed to go forward with one kind of big plan development area. It just gives them a chance to make a little bit more orderly what the state already allows. So when David showed that flow chart 135 days out from town meeting, then you start meeting with people. The second half of that chart really already exists and is already an option for property owners in Massachusetts under 40A. What we're trying to do is build a little bit of preliminary work onto that. You know, and I guess I pick on Attorney McCann with her Outer Maple. I mean, there wasn't, maybe this would have been a better option for those property owners because for whatever reason, creating a new zoning district or finding an existing zoning district to move your properties into isn't a good fit. So the plan development gives them an option to say, hey, I need to create COM 4. How do I engage you in that conversation? And then so really David's tacking on a little bit of a preliminary process that will allow that property owner or owners to work through with us that process before it gets to town meeting. So again, we think it gives a little bit more predictability and gives those owners a little opportunity to engage with more of a cross section of the community through the boards and committees that would be represented on that committee to kind of get a sense of whether or not this is something that would have legs. Because again, as David mentioned, we've had a few larger parcel owners lately relying on permits that don't come through, and then the whole thing is for naught, and all of the time invested in that ends up being for nothing. And again, here we kind of give them better guideposts and a shorter time frame. So just wanted to highlight the fact that we already do have to accommodate this process to some degree. We're just trying to put some order in front of that. Sorry. Thank you for the long-winded time.
So Jim, I'll go back to you for if you have other questions.
Yeah, again, looking for maybe a minimum lot size where this would apply. I know there are sections of town that have tried to do certain thing in their commercial or industrial zone, and they have not been able to do so. So I don't want to make it too small, but you know, where do you start? So you're just going to give anyone right now what you're saying would have to go in front of town meeting for a zoning change to try to get what they want, unless it's already provided for in the zoning bylaw. This would allow for a planned development for whatever size lot, right now, any size lot, I guess, that meets certain parameters. Do we have those parameters, Aaron?
I think
Laid
that
out
one, David, would that be, could
in a
you answer that
slide?
one better?
Do you have
There,
that in a
so
slide somewhere?
there's no current minimum lot size for proposing a planned development. I think starting this conversation with as with most of these articles, we're starting broad. Again, totally open to your ideas. If there's the board has interest in making a minimum lot size, say, you know, we don't want super small lots coming in and asking for the moon. We can certainly revisit that and take a look at the parcel sizes of projects that have gone through recently, and perhaps, you know, we come up with, you know, I don't know, maybe it's an acre. I don't know. We'd have to take a look at that in the very short term, which we can certainly do. But we wanted to leave the door open to say, you know, there's no minimum lot size that can come in and ask for this sort of thing. Again, you know, if it will be completely vetted by all the boards. So if you had a very small parcel or something that was located in an area that was undesirable for that application to go forward with, it's likely that you'd hear about it early on. But I think point taken with having it be applicable to everyone currently.
Chairman, can I interrupt?
Yep, go right ahead.
Even though I've had my turn, because my memory is now coming back to me. One, this chart you have in front of me, I am all for. I think that by having members of the other boards review and look at a project is a really good idea before it even gets going through the planning process. Also, David and I talked about how this would possibly eliminate some of the use variances that we've had. I believe this is the one, yeah, we'd eliminate the use variances, and I think I'm for that. I would like to see something more proactive than having to have someone go in and get a use variance from the ZBA, and then we get involved afterwards. So I think there's some really good points in there. Jim, I think you have a good point on the size. And we should be looking at some of the finer points, but I definitely like this chart and getting people together from other boards prior to going through the whole planning process.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that if you present this to town meeting members and they're going to say, well, what are you planning? What are you anticipating a change? Or, I mean, again, we talked about commercial 3 and the need to do some planning for the mall, where we've seen some more recent activity, but you know, the concern is the big box retailer going out by way of Amazon and needing to put in some residential use, like a marketplace or something similar at our mall. So I think it's going to raise a lot of questions and concerns if we don't have any fodder or any details. You know, we have a DTAC, we have technical review already in place that any developer can go through. And we've been kind enough to let some of the larger developers come in informally to our planning meetings already. Mm-hmm. So I think this is going to raise a lot of questions if we don't have any more detail associated with it. That's all I'm concerned about.
Well, again, remember, Jim, on that though, I mean, these are property owners that are coming forward, so we don't know what they're going to propose, right? We could get a planned development on Cherry Hill that's focused on biomanufacturing, and the next planned development could come in on 114 and want to just do multifamily exclusively. So it's not this process doesn't dictate what you can offer, what the property owners can offer. It's a process that we say, if you want something different, here's the process.
So can you draw out how it differs from the current process of the DTAC and you know, so I guess, can you compare and contrast that?
Again, and David could chime in, but I mean, I think his example of the last couple, I mean, we've seen 152 Endicott Street, probably 18 to 24 months, informals with staff, informals, they've went to um, the TRC a number of times, met with the planning board, met with the zoning board, I think 3 or 4 times. And after 18 months, no good, they don't get the permit. The recent one, Maple Square, does some informals with staff, does some informals with the planning board. All indications are that they're good. They go to the ZBA, whom they had not had any informal with, and they don't get a critical permit, and now the project's in limbo. Hollywood Hits, similar process. They kind of did what they did behind the scenes with staff, maybe had an informal, and then go for a variance and don't get anything. So again, I understand what you're saying. It's just a chance to try to give property owners a bit more predictability and a bit more contact with representatives of the boards that they're likely going to need permitting from, so that they know sooner with less investment that their idea, be it mixed use, single use or other, that they have a project that's worth investing in the next step. Because again, we've seen a lot of burned bridges in the last 18 to 24 months.
So they're going to access the boards without paying a fee? Is that what we're talking about? So they're going to float ideas without actually applying formally? Is that what we're saying?
I don't think we got to the point of a fee structure yet. The process as it's laid out is that they would submit a preliminary plan, which is included in the packet, with a charge that has specific parameters of what they need to show these boards. And then they have to submit, as you do with anything under MGL, a petition to the Board of Selectmen to get on a warrant. There are parameters laid out for the process of the preliminary plans and definitive plans, but I think, as Aaron's saying in this is not we're not proposing a new zoning district. This is really a different process. So this is all about process and not so much about what you can do where. We're really kind of taking the top off the box and saying, we're not going to limit you to what you can do where. It's what we want to hear from the applicant as to what their needs are for their individual site, if that makes any more sense.
But I guess I'll say, to Jim's point, I mean, I would imagine we would charge for the review of a preliminary plan. I mean, again, we're not envisioning this to be fully engineered at that preliminary stage, but I would imagine that there would be an application fee like there is for any other. But again, we haven't gotten to that level yet, but I would assume it's not free.
So again, I'm just concerned that if we're presenting this to town meeting, we need some more details as to how it's going to play out. If you're asking us to fill in the blanks and work with you in the next month and a half to do that, then I guess that's our charge.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think, at this point, we're certainly taking any feedback, and you raise several good points. So yeah, we can work on that. We're happy to work with any board members who want to work offline, or, we'll bring back some edits for the next meeting for sure.
Okay, thank you, John. Thank you, David and Aaron.
Sure.
Lou, why don't you go next?
Okay, sure. And I had a chance to go over this in some detail, and I talked it over also with David as well. I think that I agree with Peg in terms of, I think it's a good concept. I like the idea of having all of the various commissions and boards together as needed at the table, particularly if you're looking at Conservation Commission, Preservation Commission, or Historic District if necessary. Again, just to avoid the sort of a scenario, even as Aaron was mentioning earlier, where you have appearance, everything seems go, or you have informals before one board or commission, and then ultimately you go before another, and it gets shot down. And so I think that having this put together in this way, I think is a good way to do it. In terms of the, I think it also, I do find it, good as well that it does. I mean, as part of this, we see use variances go away too. I think that's that's a good point on it as well. So in terms of whether or not, in terms of minimum lot size, I'm not sure if I'd be in favor of having a minimum lot size on it, because if we don't have use variances, then where else would they go? I guess they would have to go to potentially just go to town meeting. And so I think keeping it within the structure, I think would be good regardless of the size of the parcel. I'm certainly, I'd be certainly, willing to chip in, in terms of reviewing any subsequent iterations of this, if we include any additional, in terms of a fee structure or that sort of thing. But in terms of as it is presented right now, I'm impressed by it. I think it's a good way to go.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
Tori?
I think I really like this one, but I want to clarify a few things for myself and also for the public. So what we'd be asking town meeting would not be to approve any particular project. It would be to approve a process that would end with a town meeting approval of each individual project, correct? So if somebody proposed something on a small lot that heavily impacted their neighbors, there would presumably be a lot of resistance to that in town meeting. And there's sort of that built-in safety mechanism that this isn't going to enable something that would be opposed to the desires of the town.
Yes, I believe that's correct. And I think too, what I would be hoping for is, as I said, the representatives from all of the various boards and commissions, just let that applicant know before they even get to the final stage, so they don't go, off on what would be a fool's errand. It would just be a case of getting everybody there ahead of time to say, this probably isn't such a great idea, or, hey, we love this, let's do it. So
now, would this effectively be zoning? So a property gets sold, this planned development goes with it, and the new owner, number one, is buying into the privileges agreed to in an approved planned development, and also the restrictions?
That's correct. Yeah, whatever was originally initiated from the process. Yeah, what was approved.
Could it override zoning? Could it override the rights in particular current zoning?
It would essentially, for all intents and purposes, rezone the parcel. So there would, if it was in COM 3, we'll just keep picking on that one. It wouldn't be COM 3 any longer. It would be whatever the stipulations were in the documents that were approved.
So it seems to me like this could really encourage long-term planning, where someone doesn't necessarily have the means to build an entire project at once, but wants to build part A, knowing that they're not going to encounter a different political climate and be unable to build part B, part C. And this could apply to multiple owners, right?
Yeah, that's correct. It would just be limited, if there was assemblage through either purchase agreements or simply multiple property owners coming in at the same time, that could happen.
So could you have a neighborhood come up with a planned development as an arts district where everyone on a street agrees to develop this idea and maybe just hypothetically allow art studios, live workspaces, and then if a house on a street were sold, it would be within that that plan development and the new owner would be buying into that concept?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, if you could pull that off, that would be,
Yeah.
quite a feat. But that being said, it wouldn't be able to override any type of fair housing limitations. Obviously, you couldn't say
Mhm.
only artists can live here or something like that. But for the most part, yeah, if you're talking about adding studios or
But
go ahead.
I mean, yeah, no, I wasn't suggesting that it would override any kind of fair housing,
No, understood. Yeah.
but that potentially you could allow someone to have, say, a artist welding shop without establishing a precedent that now you've got an industrial use in the neighborhood, and not have their next door neighbor then the next year go and apply for a variance for some kind of industrial use based on that precedent.
Yeah, that's correct. And there could also be stipulations, as drafted in those agreements to say, if there were any type of shop like you're talking about, whatever offsets need to be in place, if that's acoustical or fume related or whatever it may be, those provisions would have to be in place before it started going forward.
I think it has tremendous potential, and I think that potential is very well controlled by the mechanism of participation of the various boards and ultimate approval by the town meeting. And I would also be willing to help sort out the details if that would be helpful.
Great.
Yeah, help is always appreciated.
Gene, do you have questions?
No, I don't have any questions.
So, from my perspective, I do like the comprehensive approach. I think that's important. I think it sends the right message to the development community. But I do agree with Jim. Some of the devil's in the details here, right? So it'd be helpful, David, to do that analysis that we're talking about. Where they would play, and it also would be helpful to me to know some of the bigger communities that use this successfully. Burlington being one. I think that was on your
Sure.
map.
It was.
Do have certain understandings, because coming all the way to, the checks and balances there clearly with town meeting, but all of us who are town meeting members know that it's a long process too, right? So the feeling that I have is it should be a substantial development, not small development. That's just my initial reaction to it. But I'd like to try to get some feedback of how the other communities use it. I like the comprehensive approach, though. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, yeah, we can definitely dig into that, and I'm happy to. Luckily, we have a former Burlington staff member on our staff. If I can pick his brain.
So why don't we open it up to the public on the on this plan development approach, if there's questions from the public.
I have a couple questions, Mr. Chairman. This is Nancy McCann.
Yeah, go ahead, Attorney McCann.
Thank you. Mr. Fields and I met just very briefly about this today, and I appreciated the information that he provided, but I do have a couple questions. If we are eliminating use variances, because that's kind of all part of this process, then I think this is it's good to have an option that's a little more formalized, other than, as Aaron said, everybody's right to apply for a zone change if they wish. And I like the idea of bringing different boards into the mix early. That's always very helpful. However, I think it's been called adding predictability to the process in the discussions tonight. And I think anything from a zoning standpoint that goes to town meeting that requires a 2/3 vote is anything but predictable from a developer standpoint. That's a pretty scary process to have to line up everything for a town meeting. And I've gone through quite a number of zoning amendments in my time, and you do not know. It is not predictable until the question is called on the town meeting floor, and you will need a 2/3 vote, with the exception of a residential project due to the recent changes in the statute. but any type of commercial development will require a 2/3 vote on the floor of town meeting, and that is pretty scary from a developer standpoint. But if use variances have been done away with, this at least would give that that option in a more formalized setting. I do have a question about 2 items. Site plan approval. From my conversation with Mr. Fields today, it sounded to me like the site, that if we get this project through town meeting, that's it. You build according to the concept plans that town meeting approved. There is no site plan approval. So that means that the plan submitted during the what's it called, the development and use plan that's submitted to the planning board is in fact a full-blown site plan, which will have a significant cost associated with it when you don't even know if your use is allowed at that point. So I have a question as to whether I understood that correctly, that site plan approval is then not required for a development like this if the concept plans are approved at town meeting. Is that correct?
I could take that, John, if you'd like.
Go ahead. Yeah, please.
So the way we were envisioning it, typically we were trying to streamline it, I think, even a little bit more than some of the other communities I took a look at do. Some of them do require you after the town meeting to then go back for site plan review. Well, we can certainly do that. I think my thought was, if we're a go, let's get going and get this thing moving. I did put in this current bylaw, site plan review is not irrelevant. It would be used for any changes on site that occur after this process happens. So as Tori alluded to, say you have phase 1, 2, and 3, but by the time you get to phase 3, you know, as we all know, the price of materials and goods have changed drastically over the past year, and say the building needs to be scaled back or moved ever so slightly, or whatever the case may be, additional parking's needed. The same triggers for site plan review would apply to these zones, so that would still be in play. However, I'm more than willing to revisit taking a look at going to site plan after the town meeting, with the tweak that, you know, perhaps town meeting doesn't need the fully engineered plans, as Attorney McCann's alluding to, so the upfront spending isn't quite there just at that point. Again, when we revisit this, we can work on this before the next time, but that's something we can certainly take a look at.
David, I was going to say, I think something along that way. But I think the goalposts here would just have to be town meeting needs to know. We have to guard against significant derogation at that point. I don't think we want you to have to come back for a special permit. So I hear what you're saying, Attorney McCann. I think, as David said, I think we can talk that through. But I think the envision investment for the preliminary plan set to kind of get through to a go, no go. It would be similar to a preliminary subdivision type level. I mean, we need to know enough, but you don't need to tell us the stormwater, you know, drainage calcs. Then again, I think we need something more than that for town meeting. We envisioned a full plan set at that point because you feel like you've got a go, but I hear what you're saying. So maybe we can work something out where it's something more than that preliminary plan set, but maybe it's focusing on the text. But anyway, we can talk that through.
And I think, as we discussed earlier today too, with the engineering division's introduction of their own completely separate stormwater permit, things like drainage and stormwater don't necessarily need to be designed for the process we're talking about, which, you know, takes quite a bit off of the site planning for that. Those could be worked through with engineering for their own separate permit after the fact or before the fact.
Okay. All right. So maybe, I guess I would suggest maybe think about having after town meeting, the actual site plan process in some form still happen that, for example, deals with landscaping specifics and lighting specifics and things like that, that maybe a developer would not want to put into the mix and the expense before they even know if they have their use approved. So I guess I would suggest and request that maybe that be some consideration, that there actually be a site plan process afterward with a more detailed plan. 2 more items of the I'm a little concerned about the calling of town meeting for purposes of development, and maybe this is where you get into whether there's a minimum size, because I could see where if we're putting a 135-day clock on this, I could have a development coming in with preliminary plans, and then within 135 days, there has to be a special town meeting again, with the cost associated with a special town meeting. And I'm just concerned, again, from the developer standpoint, that those special town meetings will be hard to call as a practical matter to get that done, and who bears the cost of holding a special town meeting, and that sort of thing. So that's just a logistics kind of thing that I throw out there that is a little concerning to me when I see that this would have to go to town meeting. The final point I have, and this I haven't had an
Attorney
opportunity
McCann,
to
just
give it
don't
any.
do site plan, and then they can save the money on.
Yeah, okay, I'm fine with not doing site plan. I just want to make sure that the planning board members who are hearing this tonight understand that they're not going to have site plan review, because I don't know that that was all particularly clear. But then there's also the expenses I said before you even know if you have your use, and that's a concern. My last question, and I haven't had a chance to think this through after speaking with Mr. Fields today, but what is the process for an abutter who, under normal circumstances, for a variance or a special permit, has the ability to appeal? What is the process if this goes through this, as we're defining here in this flow chart, and it goes to town meeting, and it passes town meeting with a 2/3 vote, and the direct abutter, who is not a town meeting member and couldn't speak on the floor of town meeting, it doesn't like this project and wants to appeal? I'm just, again, I haven't had a chance to think through it from a legal standpoint, but I'm just concerned that our appellate rights being lost somehow here if it goes through the town meeting process, because the right of an abutter to appeal on a town meeting zoning amendment is not clear. It's not a clear process.
Yeah, I mean, I
That's
think,
my
it,
question.
oh, I can attempt to answer that now, or we can double back.
Oh, yeah, sure, that's fine. I just throw that out there. I haven't had a chance to think it through, but I just, as I'm looking at this, thinking, wow, does the abutter have any right to appeal that they would absolutely have under standard 40A procedure?
Yeah, I mean, I think they'd have the same rights under 40A as they would for any other rezone. And, ideally, the whole point of the representative town meeting is they should lobby their town meeting members.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, because there really isn't a good appeal process under 40A section 5, I think, on a zoning amendment.
Right.
It isn't clear. So I just throw that out there for some more thought on this.
And again, I think the concept that David is the front end process to the typical standard rezoning process that this kind of builds off of, or builds a pre-process to, ideally vets that out so that, and I'll just pick on your example of Outer Maple Street. We're just going to talk about that. We don't know what the abutters are going to say. This process would at least afford some public process before we get to town meeting to vet their concerns. And then again, along your lines, I guess if the zoning isn't what they're aggrieved by, but then they were aggrieved by something on the site plan, perhaps that's another reason to consider some sort of site plan at the end of the process, whereby there's some sort of public vetting of how that plan is going to go into practice. But good point. But we can think about that more.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good comments. Are there other comments from the public?
Yep, Matthew Duggan.
Go ahead, Mr. Duggan.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matthew Duggan, again, select board member. So this planned development district, it's not really clear to me. I think Attorney McCann brings up some good points that this needs to be flushed out a little bit more. before it actually goes as a warrant article. But I do want to speak to the use variances because I'm troubled by them on a regular basis where they overrule the will of town meeting. And I'll use 152 Endicott Street, the old Denny's site, as an example where residential is not allowed by right, and yet the applicant spent a considerable amount of energy proposing a plan that required, I think, maybe at least a dozen variances. And so my argument during that process was the town meeting, if they wanted residential in that area, they would approve it either through an overlay district or some other method. So to allow just a few appointed individuals, with all due respect, to overrule the will of the town meeting, which is one of the purest forms of democracy, it just kind of it short circuits the will of the voters. And so can we just speak a little bit about because I think the plan here is to actually eliminate use variances, but Chapter 48, Section 10 still allows approval based on perhaps, the topography of the land or, financial hardships. So the applicant can still get relief. So how can we tighten this process to ensure that when the applicant submits a plan, that they know what the rules are, and that the ZBA can't do just a couple of people can override our zoning bylaws. So can someone speak to that about what happens? We eliminate the use variances, but we're still I think still open to the ability to to have these projects approved.
I think I could take a crack maybe at that one.
Yeah, it's kind of a lot there. So David, just explain if we eliminate, and I saw a slide where Danvers is one of the only, maybe one of the few communities in Eastern Massachusetts that allows this. So what's the objective here?
The objective, I think, here for what we were discussing for the plan developments was to introduce the concept, effectively see where it goes tonight. I mean, I think I've heard some good feedback for sure. I mean, I don't think we're trying to eliminate any development schemes. I think if anything, we're trying to maybe unlock it in a more thought out approach with the plan developments. In terms of how that interacts with specifically 40A Section 10, the current framework for that is the state has essentially said you can do use variances if you were doing them prior to 1976. If you were not, you cannot introduce them at a later date. So we had those on the books, as some of the communities I showed you did as well. So those we can still offer them as much as those other communities can. However, if they are eliminated, those would no longer be available for projects going forward. I think the interplay between the two of what you were alluding to was we're not looking to eliminate all types of development, and if anything, we'd like to allow property owners to utilize their parcels through something like a planned development or something similar to the greatest extent possible that's tolerable by all the boards that would vet it and town meeting.
So David, it sounds like there's we've gotten some good feedback on this, right? I mean, the concept of a one-stop shopping, I think most people say that makes sense. But then, as we said, it's what's behind the details and how does it work? And I think what we might want to do is, obviously, I knew this one was going to get a lot of conversation, is digest these comments and continue it to the next meeting. If you can do some analysis around the questions that are being posed, does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. I put together that small flow chart, but I can flesh out significantly more detail for the next meeting and get some written material to you as well.
Okay. All right, so what, anyone else from the public on this particular plan development? Because I'd like to try to go to the civic space next.
John, could I make a brief comment on this?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, I just want to comment on something that Attorney McCann said. I agree that having the full site plan in the beginning of this process with the town meeting approval creates a pretty large burden for the applicant. But it also means that something that might not get built for 20 years would essentially be pre-approved. And I would rather see the site plan approval when something is being built, as it is with any existing zoning, so that site plan approval would occur in a contemporary context. If we're talking about a decades-long process, I certainly wouldn't want somebody building something right now that had site plan approval in the 1990s.
Yep.
That's all.
Hello?
Yeah, I just picking up on Tori's point. I think I think it's a good point. I mean, and this is something we work on in terms of maybe in preparation for the next meeting. I mean, there's a way that we could potentially put in even some time limiting language that perhaps could, if that would require that the site plan and everything be done within an X period of time. So within X period of time of the town meeting approval. So that way potentially you could avoid the scenario of putting all the effort in at the front end, without knowing that you're getting town meeting approval, provided that you do it within a certain period of time. I'm not sure if that's potentially what other communities have done in terms of dealing with that issue.
That's why I want to try to get some of the feedback on the communities that have been most successful use of this concept. I agree. I think a lot of those questions, and fully expect those would be some of the questions that town meeting members would want to know.
Yep, understood. I can work on that for sure.
Okay, good conversation. So why don't we turn to the civic space proposal? You want to put that up, David, if you don't mind. And Peg,
Yep. Give me 1 second.
I'll go back to you if you want to start.
Oh, okay, the maps. Have too many questions on this. If I understand it correctly, and I talked to David, we're talking about state, federal, and local parcels, utilities and right-of-ways, and then private, such as St. John's schools and things like that, Essex Tech. I don't have, I guess the one question I do have is, for example, Whipple Hill was Archdiocese property. Under this regulation, it was sold and was developed. But under this regulation, where that was an open space and part of, a civic, I guess you could call part of the, it was going to be a cemetery, I think, part of the civic area, would that have made a difference with this type of bylaw?
David, can you take that question?
Yeah,
I'm gonna throw that to my
wasn't
colleague.
civic. That was private.
Oh,
That was privately owned. That was privately
I
owned.
thought that was Archdiocese, Jim.
Yeah, but that's nothing to do with civic. How is that? How's that civic?
This includes private ownership.
It's privately owned by, you could call it a charity or whatever. It's not open to the public.
The map we're looking at includes, this proposal includes privately owned parcels put into these zoning districts. In the example, if this proposal were adopted in the Whipple Hill example, the Archdiocese could have still parceled off the back land from the cemetery, but the buyer of that land would have had to go back to town meeting to get it zoned. I think that was in the I'm not sure if that was still R1 or if that's R2, but
I think that's
Or
it.
two.
point being that they would have to go to town meeting and say, we want to move this land, which was previously intended to be a cemetery in your open space, civic space district, and I want to move it into R2. And town meeting would have said, how many homes does that create? Okay, that seems reasonable, or that seems unreasonable.
The same thing for the wetlands behind me, which I think is the green area on the map, the light green area, is open space, Muddy Boo. So that would be considered a civic space. I think that,
I think in this map, I don't believe that that area, and I know David, if I think that's over kind of north of the 114A area. I think
No,
it's that
it's
you're off of Center Street, right? Is that?
we're off Center Street, where's Hobart, Sutter and Hobart.
Hobart's right here, coming along here, center.
Yeah,
So
you're
it
right
looks like
there,
you're,
yeah.
if they, here's to Orlando Way.
Yeah, that's, so again, when all of this land, I can't remember, R2A, David, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yep, so that would stay in R2A. So again, this is where the mix between current ownership and current zoning kind of intersected. So out there, what's happening was all the parcels that are in R2A come wholly into R2A. And then I think another example would be like the East Coast Road, the transfer station is the dark green in the bottom left. Like in this example, that goes over to institutional use as a capped landfill. The town forest and the transmission lines on the other side of that along the Ipswich go into the open space category.
But you just said if it's privately owned, I mean, an owner could go to town meeting and develop it. I'm trying to think of the purpose of this. I understand the purpose of having open space and having it, certain areas designated as open space. I guess I'm having difficulty with privately owned, or see, I don't consider the church privately owned. I consider that an institution. But I'm having difficulty just dealing with what exactly this will do.
Well, again, most of the properties in this district that are privately owned currently are allowed to do what they're doing regardless of what zoning district they're in, because they have a protection under 40A Section 3, the Dover Amendment. So I'll just pick on St. John's Prep. St. John's Prep can do whatever, as long as it's mission oriented. It doesn't matter what our local zoning rules say they can do. If it's related to their mission, they'll be exempt. Municipalities have the same rights. Federal government, state government, all have those rights. And again, educational and religious institutions and certain public utilities all have that protection. If those institutions want to abandon that use, like the case of the Archdiocese with the cemetery, it affords the municipality that basically it'll get a say in the excess property that they're selling off, because it won't be useful to me to build single family homes on land that can only be a cemetery, a park, or open space. So again, as long as these institutions continue to do what they're doing, or if they go away and they sell to another institution. So, we've seen certain congregations, that church goes away, but another church comes in, totally fine. It stays right where it is. We have no say in that. But if that church decides to really go away and they sell to, I'll pick on the one right down the street. The Masonic Temple is R1. If the Masons go away, it becomes 4 more houses at the end of the neighborhood. Under this proposal, the owner of the site would have to come to town meeting and say, I would like to be put in R1, or I would like to engage the plan development process and propose something else. But so again, I think that the immediate benefit to the town is the recognizing that these spaces, these properties, whether public or private, contribute a lot to the town's character through the open space that they preserve and the access and the the meeting spaces and all of that community that happens in and around these parcels. Secondarily, it offers us, the town, some defense should those institutions get out of the business.
And that's what I was just thinking as you were going through that. I mean, it allows us to come to the table too, the town to come to the table too before something's sold. So, no, I'm fine with this. I was just trying to understand exactly what it would do. And I think one of the things I thought of immediately was Whipple Hill, and then another one was a number of churches too. So, and St. John's Prep. So I don't have any more questions on that right now. I mean, there may be more as we get further into the details, but I don't have anything right now.
Okay. Lou? Oh, Jim, I'm sorry, Jim.
Yeah, I'm just concerned about that one. I think you have to identify the properties you're talking about, especially when you're talking about, just that one building, the Masonic Temple downtown. That's one little lot. So effectively, you're in the previous bylaw, we talked about making it easier for people who want to do development, because there have been several projects recently that people have spent a lot of money and got shot down by the ZBA and didn't happen. And so you're talking about making a plan unit development for no size limit to make it easier for people to do an approval process. Conversely, now on this project, if a particular charity or institution, by virtue of the fact that COVID hit and they've not had donations, they haven't been open, and now they're forced to sell some or a part or all of their parcel, we're going to make them go to town meeting? I think that's ridiculous. I think that's onerous, and you're making it, as Attorney McCann said, to get town meeting approval, you'd probably need a super majority. Why are we adding this additional penalty, if you will, by virtue of the fact that they're a charity or an organization that the Dover Amendment protects and encourages, and now we're making it much harder for them to sell their property because they're restricted in the use. This has never been something that I've seen. I don't know if other towns do this, but it seems to be very restrictive. And we're telling, basically, if you're a charity or a public institution, we're going to add this additional onerous layer for you to perhaps sell off your parcel of your land or some of your land in order to survive. Now you got to go through and convince town meeting members, there's a process right now that Whipple Hill had to go through. So I know you're not happy with the fact that that went through and development was allowed, but that was a process, and that went through several meetings between planning board and ZBA and Concom and so on. So I'm confused by this. On one hand, you're trying to make things easier on the plan unit development side for people. And on the other hand, we're punishing a charity that may need to sell off some land for whatever purpose because they don't have enough, members or, worshipers or money going into their coffers, and they need to do so to survive. It doesn't make sense to me. I'm sorry. Can't follow the logic.
Okay.
Do other towns have this? I mean, do you have other towns that have this, and are they successful? And how easy are you going to be able to go through a town meeting process? We have town meetings once a year, maybe twice if you're lucky. So some potentially charity out there that could be going bankrupt or needs to whatever sell a parcel of their land, going to have to wait a year before they go to the next town meeting, and they have a very risky ask to see if they can rightfully sell property that they own. You know, it just you're creating more zoning on a charities that are carve-outs that are allowed, you know, under the Constitution. Doesn't make sense to me. I'm sorry.
We can get
Okay.
you some examples of other communities that have been doing this. I hear your concerns. It's not saying it's without controversy. But yeah,
I mean, if you can show, I think on all these, you got to show what parcels are affected. I mean, I mean, I'm fine with Endicott Park and the library and those being displayed on a plan. You know, that's fine on the map. Great. Those are municipal properties that are dedicated to parks and development in that sense. But if you're going to start affecting and taking away, essentially, not necessarily taking away, but really hindering someone's property rights by rezoning it and saying now you have to go for this extra step that you never would have had to do before. So we're kind of we're stigmatizing this charity, you know.
I don't think it's about stigmatizing. I think, again, I understand why it could appear to be inconsistent with something like the planned unit development. But again, I think the consistent thread there is certain parcels mean enough that town meeting there should be a public process around that. And again, a property that's been sitting there contributing to the civic character of the community for all of our lifetimes now wants to do something different. Again, it's the same philosophy there to say, hey, that's a big change. We think town meeting should weigh in. But I can get you the examples, and I understand what you're getting at, and we'll try to get you more information on that.
I'm fine with utilities and open space, but once you throw in an institutional user, it seems to me that you're treading on thin ice, I think. And I really would want to see out of those green spaces what they are. Because are you really going to ask Masonic Temple if they run out of money and now you have to go and schedule a town meeting for the May town meeting or a special town meeting in November to see if you can sell your property? It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I'm sorry.
It's not that they don't need to come to town meeting to sell unless they're changing the use.
Okay.
Right? If they found if the Masons sold to Kiwanis, then nothing happens.
But what if they sell? Wouldn't you be just as concerned? So are you saying the use is okay? You're not going to require them to come before you if they keep it as charity?
Right.
So right now,
any use, like the first 6 uses are all allowed in all of these districts, are all allowed by state law because we have to allow them, right? We can't not permit a church. We can't not permit a public service utility. We can't not permit an educational use in any district. So if you're staying in here, it's all good. If Essex Aggie wants to buy St. John's Prep, they don't come to town meeting. That's fine. They can do that. If Essex Tech wants to sell to private developer who wants to buy a site that yields 250 single family homes, yeah, you got to come back to town meeting.
Why though? It has a process. It has to go through planning board. Has to go through zoning board.
No, and that's just a philosophy that I don't know that the town is ready to deal with. Some, not all. I mean, the Mason building, maybe 4 homes is incidental on its impact, but Beverly Airport going under, which many people wish would happen, how many homes does that yield? And there's nothing we can do about it right now. Well, I guess it's zoned in industrial, so maybe that's not a good example, but there are parcels that are quite large that are zoned residential that's done. It's a by right thing. It's going to be single family homes. And is that appropriate? And again, I will say, as we go through, these are all good. These are the conversation that we should have. I mean, what is the future of these parcels if they were not doing what they were doing now? that's the point. And I think, as we said at the last meeting, we don't have a single square foot. And I know what you're saying, Jim, as well. That's fine for town. That's not fine for state. But I do think we should talk more about the private parcels in the sense of what would happen if a large institution went away. Well, are we ready for that? People got upset about North Street. That's 9 acres. There's 300 acres here. Are we ready for that sort of impact? And again, maybe we're not. Maybe
Well,
we are.
look at the, I mean, pretend that Bill Lee stuff was a school, if you will. It's not, but again, here he is redeveloping that project, and there's been plenty of play. There's been plenty of town involvement. There's been plenty of board involvement. So how do you feel that, there wouldn't be, and why are you requiring them, instead of having a planning board or ZBA vote with public participation, to go in front of 105-member town meeting, or whatever the exact number is, to let those individuals vote to decide whether they can do it? It doesn't make sense to me that
Okay.
they're may not be as versed in the zoning bylaws and in the requirements that are required. You're kind of taking away that initial decision from the appropriate boards, it seems to me. I don't know.
Good
That's
feedback.
my thought.
No, that's good feedback, Jim. Thank you.
Okay.
It's excellent feedback. So Lou, let me go to you.
Sure. Yeah, a couple of things that I have with respect to this, and I understand the points with respect to the sort of the distinction between the publicly owned property versus privately owned property, or institutional property, and I am interested in seeing how other communities have sort of dealt with that issue as well, and to see if other communities have done it in this approach, or if they've done it in a modified approach. But with respect to this approach, though, it's the way I'm looking at it and having reviewed it, I'm as is pointed out, if we're looking at Archdiocese property, for example, or picking out the Masonic Temple, they are not prevented from, in my view at least, they're not prevented from selling the property to another like-minded use, or to another, and the concern that I have is that I think what this can do is this does help sort of put a bit of a stay of sorts on things, in order so that the town could get a handle on on what's going on. If you did have like a particularly large institutional owner of property, leave town, and so, and one concern that I do have as well is just, and I know there was mention about, well, there is other town involvement because of other boards, ZBA or planning board, but what if you're in a situation where you do have where and it's my understanding, and you have to correct me if I'm wrong, Aaron, if you can correct, I'm not sure. What if you had a situation where you had let's say, like St. John's Prep, they would be, if let's say they went away, that's based on the zoning in that area, it could be developed as a matter of right, correct? There would not be, if it was done within, if they were doing if they were doing development within sort of within existing zoning, development could be done as a matter of right. Is that correct?
Right now, that area is zoned R3, and much like the subdivision that's been proposed on North Street, that one would assume that, again, there's wetlands in there, so it's not 100% developable. But yeah, that's the fear, is that the subdivision control in and of itself doesn't afford enough protection, or might not. Again, if we feel that those underlying zones or their current zones are appropriate for those institutions, that's okay. But again, I think some of these large ones beg that question of, are we really ready for what could be unleashed if those uses discontinued?
Yeah. And turning to what can be unleashed, do you have any, and this can be either revisited at another meeting, or if you have the information now, has this, obviously this has been done. This has been done in other communities, and was there anything particularly that prompted it?
Anecdotally, this concept, again, like I hinted at way back when, it used to happen a bit more often, you know, before our lifetime, when zoning was quite young, there was some of this. I think recently, the more modern vintage of it really sprung from the Archdiocese crisis in the early 2000s. And that's when you saw a lot of towns trying to get proactive about private institutional zoning, and what the impact could be on their community. And like I said, I was in Milton in 2004 when the Archdiocese closed 3 parishes. I think all 3 ended up reverting to either what they were zoned, or because that community had a 40B problem, I think they got a 40B as well. And again, that is a kind of an asterisk to this conversation. But so I'm trying to remember the other couple of instances, but again, there was a little flurry of activity around that time. And since then, it's kind of been slowly seeping through Eastern Massachusetts.
Got it. So, yeah, I mean, I think it definitely. I mean, I am, you know, maybe interested in finding a little bit more, but I'm in general, you know, I'm in favor of the concept. I think that it's I think it does provide a good, you know, an important safeguard. And again, there, as long as well, there's the owner of the property is not precluded in any way. They don't need to go to a town meeting for selling to another like-minded entity. So I have nothing further right now. Thanks.
Okay, Tori?
I've got some questions about this, but I'm strongly in favor of it. The hearing about this resonates with a situation that happened in the town I grew up in, and I'll describe what that situation would look like if it were happening in Danvers. Let's imagine Halton Richmond Middle School becomes outdated. We build a new middle school, and the town sells Plains Park. That's R1. We would have site plan approval, but we can't say, no, we like it as a park. We got to approve a new neighborhood. That's going to have a dramatic effect on the character of all the neighborhoods around it, the value of those homes. You're going to have people who were used to having a playground, a field. You know, I live out on Oak Street and I walk over there with my kids. It changes a very large area. It changes what's available for the houses right there. Dramatically changes the character of their yards, of their properties, their homes. And we don't have any safeguard as long as whatever use they proposed wasn't asking for a special permit or something like that. If the open space is fundamental to the character of our neighborhoods, that should be recognized in the zoning. I think it gets more delicate with privately owned land, but you still have very similar situations. For example, if you live adjacent to St. John's Prep, since that example's come up, and they're zoned R3 and they decided to sell a big chunk of their land, those neighborhoods could be dramatically changed. And I think it is fair that the town meeting has some say before large areas get developed in ways that transform large neighborhoods, large areas beyond those particular parcels. I would like to see details of what would be allowed in these zoning districts, especially institutional uses. You know, I think we do need to be careful to be consistent with what these institutions need to survive and continue in their missions. And we don't want to be overly restrictive But at the same time, we do need to protect the neighborhoods, the character of the town. Just think of the runoff, the impervious surfaces, or, the traumatic changes that could happen if a very large parcel, which is currently zoned for development, suddenly became available. But I would like to see the definitions of the zoning districts. Do we have those yet, or when would we expect to see those?
David, is that, I know,
Sorry, I can only see the map, so I don't know if somebody's looking at me or not. We have Aaron has developed a preliminary use table. I can send that around. I think we wanted to have this conversation first to float the idea and the concept, bring it back from last year, and I can send that out to you as soon as possible. If there's any definitions that need to be incorporated as part of that, we can send those out as well.
And are these newer maps available to us?
Yes, I believe I put them in the updated packet. If not, let me know. Saying that, I think what I will do is create a packet after tonight to allow you to take a look at anything that's changed based on this discussion, so you don't have to go back and see if things have been updated or what's been updated and reference it for yourself. So you'll just know what's been updated since tonight.
Thank you. The new maps make things a lot easier to.
And I think it's hard to see on the screen, but when you tap into the PDFs online or in the packet, same map, you can zoom way in on these things, and the parcels are there. They're hard to see here at this, zoomed out level, but when you zoom in, you can totally slide through the map. I'd suggest, 300% or something like that, and you can get right down to street level and bounce between the two maps to check it out and see how this plays out. We'd love that feedback.
Thank you.
Gene?
I don't have anything in addition to what we discussed.
Okay. So I have a few questions. I'm a little concerned with this one too. Around, let's look at a parcel, the YMCA, right? They're bucking the trends being an independent YMCA. All small YMCA's have consolidated. That sits in a residential area, I would assume, right? So if they consolidate with, a regional Y, and they decide they can't make a go at it, that campus, they're not going to be allowed to sell without going to town meeting. Is that what I'm hearing?
Property owners can buy and sell. The only thing they need to do is if the use is not, if they want a different use, they may need to go to town meeting to move into a different category, which is probably a different zoning district, but we don't prohibit them from selling.
No, I know they could go forward, but the reality is they're going to have to go get special permission, because if it's not going to make it as an I'm just using this as an example, right? Because this is the challenge with conversations like this, because I don't want people to say what's going on are these organizations in trouble? But the reality is consolidation goes on all the time, especially in education. And so, so I have a concern about what that process would look. And if they, and the prep's another good example. I live up in the area, but they have a soccer field right off of Summer Street. That could be almost a Form A lot. If they decide that they wanted to add it surplus, they don't need it, the campus is across the street, are they going to have to go to town meeting to sell that surplus piece? Based on what we're talking about?
If the buyer of the property wishes to develop it consistent with the neighborhood that it abuts, somebody, either the seller or the buyer, would need to go to town meeting and put it in an appropriate zoning district that would create the proposal that they are buying the property for.
Because
if St. John's Prep found a church that needed a flat field that they wanted to put a new parish or rectory or meeting space on? No. They could sell that and the new institution would have the same protections the prep currently has, and they could go right to a building permit.
All right, I get that argument, Aaron, but the reality is, I'm just using that parcel as an example. It sits right next, it butts all single family homes. Right, so it's not like they're selling it, again, it's not like the decision would be to sell out the whole campus, but if they have surplus property they don't think they need anymore, we've now added a restriction on it. So I do think we got to identify these parcels that are affecting institutions so that we're fair to the people that understand what we're really voting on and what we're trying to prevent. I get it. A lot of these small colleges who are struggling in Newton and other areas, they're selling off their campuses to developers. And
John, can I ask a question, John?
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Just on that, in that vein, it would seem to me, if we're affecting people's property rights by adding additional zoning, we have to notify these people. We have to notify these institutions. I mean, just by way of reference, the last few zoning meetings that we've had, the special town meetings that we've had, the town has hired consultants and paid tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to consultants to come in to talk about changing zoning and so on. And we have spent, I think on the last zoning change meeting, we saw that presentation maybe 20 times. Now we're going to make two major zoning changes to town, plan unit developments and this one. And we're going to have one more meeting on this and try to get it in front of town meeting. We don't have details. We don't have facts. We haven't notified potential property owners that are going to be seriously affected by this. I mean, if you think about it, you're raising the bar and you're taking away someone's property rights. So if I'm affected, I'm feeling that constitutionally that you've just added a restriction on me, and we're not going to invite them to the table to participate. We're just going to rezone the town in 2 meetings, and we're going to throw this out the town meeting where we don't have any details. It just seems that we're really rushing this. This is something that we're all seeing for the first time. We've got another meeting in October, and we're talking about a November town meeting. And you're going to get this in front of the finance committee. And if I'm St. John's Prep, was I notified about this? If I'm the YMCA, was I notified about this? That my rights have been impacted? It just doesn't seem that we've done enough vetting. We don't have enough details. We haven't invited people to the party that are going to be affected. I don't know how we can go forward on these last two, because we don't
I
have
guess,
the details.
Jim, that's a fair point. But to be clear, we have followed the law. So we've done everything we're supposed to do under 40A Section 5 for zoning amendment proposals. But your point is well taken and totally understood.
I mean, if you're going to change my zoning and my rights of property ownership, and I haven't even been made aware of it, it doesn't seem constitutional.
That's not, well, 40A Section 5 tells us exactly how we do it, and that's what we've done. But I get your point. I understand. This is potentially has some impacts.
I think it has a lot of impacts, and you're not telling any of us who's impacted. How many churches, YMCAs, whatever, are going to be affected, and have they received any notice of this? I don't think they have, and I don't think we have a list. So I'm not sure. I'm not ready to vote on this or the other one. We don't have enough details. We've got one more meeting to talk about this, and you want to put it in front of FinCom and the rest of the town meeting. I don't think we're ready. This is new. This is a brand new thing that we're seeing. I mean, housekeeping is one thing, but this is a major thing in my mind. And I'm not trying to be a pain in the neck.
No, I appreciate the conversation, Jim. This is good. This is okay. We should have these conversations. To be honest, this is good.
I mean, the downtown redistricting. I mean, we had 20 meetings, 25 meetings.
24.
Yeah. I mean, this we're having 2.
Well, we
It
had 2
doesn't-
last year too, so give me
Not
credit
on
for 4.
this, not on this item.
We had a
On
few.
this one?
But no, again, Jim, this is good. And again, I would ask, to your point, we can identify all the parcels. I would ask that you give me another 30 minutes, maybe not tonight, but download those PDFs, zoom in on it, and let's set aside some time to have that conversation. Because again, I think we have more information than we can tell you what parcels these are. And again, I don't know. Again, at this point, a butter notification or property owner notification probably be hard to pull off. But I understand your point. But again, we're happy to zoom in on this and identify those parcels for you. They are there. If you zoom in, you will see them.
Well, and I would just assume, Aaron, that, the finance committee and the select board and even town meeting members are going to ask all these same questions. Who's impacted? Have they been notified? Right. So this is the beginning of it. So this has been a good conversation. I just, I share Jim's concern, in terms of fairness on the other side too. On one end, the town wants the ability to have oversight, but I'm concerned about partial sales too. And then, all right, so those are my comments. So anyone from the public that wants to talk about this?
Yep. Matthew Duggan, just
Go ahead,
brief
Mr.
comment
Duggan.
if I may.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matthew Duggan, select board member. So just want to say that I agree with Mr. Adler's perspective that this was sort of like a circuit breakers, right? So I have a real life example similar to what Mr. Adler had, and I'm not going to share it with you tonight, but you can have a situation where just a couple of appointed individuals on a planning board can make a decision that ultimately changes the character of a community forever. And I'm speaking from, in a negative way. So this type of bylaw, I think, would open it up the process to a bigger audience. So that's all I have for now, but I'll definitely be speaking to this down the road. And I think Mr. Henry is he mentioned a couple of examples from other communities. We never know what's coming at us down the road in terms of projects or properties being sold. So I think this kind of helps even the playing field. So that's all I have at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. David, anyone else do you see, or Josh?
I don't see anyone who's looking to speak.
Okay.
I'm not sure if Attorney McCann or Mr. Lou Bernanzani, sorry if I'm saying that incorrectly, are members of the public who are still here. I'm not sure if either of them wish to speak on any of these matters.
This is Nancy McCann. No, I don't. I'll hold my comments for another time. I think they're certainly, I have a number of clients who would be significantly affected by this. So let's see what additional information comes out at the next meeting.
Great, thank you. All right, so it's 9:10. Should we go to 9:30 and try to pick up the new warrant articles other than these two? Obviously, I knew these two would get a lot of conversation. So, and we're going to continue the conversation at our next meeting. But any questions? I'll start with you, Peg, on the remaining articles, the new articles. I know, for the benefit of the public, the planning division gave all the planning board members an opportunity to speak one-on-one. and a lot of questions were probably answered during that period of time, but I just want to go back to the board first to see if there's any other questions. And obviously we can pick it up at our next meeting as well, but if we go to 9:30, we can at least get some of this behind us for the first round of questioning. Peg, any questions?
I don't. I had a long conversation with David, and a lot of this, I'm looking to see which articles they were, but I was comfortable with the comments he made. He answered my questions and kind of allayed my fears. So I don't have any at this point. I think that this has been interesting tonight because Jim has brought up points that I didn't even think of. Even though, like on the last, the civic space zoning, I am obviously for that in some way or the other. So this has been very good. But my meeting with David was good for now. And if I have other questions, I think what I'll do is I'll email David after this meeting.
Okay, great. Jim?
No, I don't have any other questions right now, John.
Okay. Boo?
Yeah, just and this is just, I guess, a question in terms of timing. I know we have some general bylaw articles that are coming up as well. For example, I know we just had earlier today, and Aaron Henry we had our Preservation Commission meeting and discussed the preservation demolition delay, and I know that there's some comments that came from the commission. So are those going to be, will we see a further red line on that, Aaron?
Yeah, I'm not sure if the planning board, I mean, obviously, if you guys go on our website and you'll eventually find all of those other, the wetlands bylaw and the preservation. But yeah, as a result of preservation, looking for a few edits, I'm going to make those changes. Make sure David sees them because he did most of the drafting. So make sure he's okay with my tweaks, and then redistribute that to the Preservation Commission in hopes that we get everyone signing off on that.
Cool. Okay.
And I think Concom's already approved the changes, David. So.
Yeah, that's correct.
The only other question, and again, David and Josh were they were really very generous with their time and sort of walking through the remaining articles. And I think I'm in pretty good shape there. I guess the only other, and this doesn't have to be today, but I'd be interested maybe in discussing a little more, maybe walking through the EFLA article. Just in terms of, I know that we spoke about in terms of the, just in terms of, I guess the question I had was in terms of like, sort of just the process for my benefit as well as the public, I guess, in terms of identifying sort of, pre-existing and sort of how sort of the new bylaw would work with what was existing.
Sure, I can address that.
Sure.
Yeah, so in terms of the existing bylaw, we're not proposing any changes to how to do an EFLA, how to propose an EFLA, how it's approved and what board or commission it goes to if relief is necessary. There's still a cap at 25 units. Technically, they're not dwelling units, but 25 EFLAs per year. The relationship to the primary homeowner is not changing. I think I had mentioned to you all last time, it's primarily a change in how to measure them and what gets included. I've had some conversations with other members and other individuals. There's some design characteristics and critiques that the zoning board continually looks for that could potentially be added to the bylaw. Even from what I've drafted based on tonight, potential removal could be something about including the common space within the overall size cap, but we can take a look at that. I'm prepared to draft something for the next meeting on that. But in terms of how it works with the existing units, there shouldn't be any change there. In terms of identifying those units, I believe when this bylaw originally came about, there was an amnesty period for those who may have had an in-law apartment, they could come forward and formalize that, and that's still on the books. That period's now over, so anyone who had not identified an EFLA previously would technically be in violation.
Got it.
But they could still come, they could come and apply to formalize that if they wanted to.
Understood. Okay. Sounds good. I don't think I have anything further right now. Thank you.
Blue. Tori?
Well, this should be an easy one. I'm looking at the definition of storage container: fully enclosed, detached, self-supporting structure, not having a foundation, electricity, or plumbing, and utilized for temporary storage of any kind. A storage shed is allowed by right on residential property. Should we have a definition of a storage container that is clearly not a shed? Because right now, this proposed definition of storage container sounds like a shed.
We can, certainly differentiate between the two. I don't think we have any definition right now for a shed. We just have a definition of accessory structure. So we could add a. Yep. Go ahead.
I agree. I couldn't find a definition of a shed, and it's interesting. I kind of assumed there might be one where I didn't know to look, but yeah.
No, we generally
Go ahead.
Generally just consider those accessory structures. However, I mean, it could be as simple as something as adding a but-for clause in the storage container section and say, this does not include sheds.
And I think one difference, David, this might sound wonkish, but I mean, it's in theory, an accessory structure is permanently affixed to the ground where the storage shed would not be. So there might be an easy, like you said, but for or such as that we can add to that. Because in theory, a shed's got to be affixed to the ground, through the building permit process. So.
Yeah, we can draft something and send it around for that, Tori.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gene?
Nope, nothing from me.
My only question right now is the demolition. I get the concept of what we're trying to do and slow down historical buildings, but as we all get older, the housing stock's getting older, and is 100 years really the right vintage? I'm more concerned about what's the objective of vintage we're trying to protect. Is a 1920s home now, is that the vintage we're trying to protect, early 1900s?
So I think on that one, just to take a stab at it, most of the other communities we looked at, it's 75 years. Some of it's longer, some of it's shorter. The current date's 1915. So the date that is in the existing demo delay bylaw affixes it to 1915. I think going as we move forward, literally in time, that certain structures as they come of age may become worthy of preservation that weren't perhaps before to other generations. Obviously, if we fast forward way forward in time, something like a brutalist structure like Boston City Hall, for instance, I don't think anyone even liked that building until maybe a few years ago, and it's been there for 50 years. All of a sudden, it's becoming kind of cool. So, we're trying to future cast that. In the future, perhaps that's something worth saving, whereas for the last 30, 40 more years, that building's received not a lot of love. So that was the intent. That was the intent with the rolling date.
Okay.
So that's where we were going.
So David, just for the benefit of the public too, have we found ways to save buildings that people wanted to have saved? Is there any good examples of this recently?
That's an excellent question. That's the one we get by far on the most about the Preservation Commission. So the commission itself doesn't have a lot of tools in the toolbox afforded to it to actually physically go out and save buildings. What you really need is money, to be honest. So, Glen Magna, obviously in town's a great example of that. Some of the other buildings that the Historical Society owns or have purchased are good examples there. And then obviously other civic-owned buildings. But for the most part, it takes significantly more money than you'd think to preserve and save an older structure, particularly when there's not a return at the end of it, unless it's a private homeowner doing it for themselves.
That's helpful.
Sure.
I don't have any other questions, and given the lateness, why don't we adjourn and then pick it up in a couple of weeks? Does that make sense? And I think, there's been excellent feedback that's been given to the staff, and, we'll carry on in a couple of weeks. And obviously, Peg, if you have certain questions between your departure for vacation, let us know. We'll ask you.
I have Wi-Fi. I might see if I can Zoom from, I think that day I'll be in Vienna. We'll see if I remember. The hard thing is remembering. See if I can Zoom you guys. I hate to miss a meeting, and especially involving zoning, but.
If I was in Vienna, I'm not sure I'd be making it to the planning board.
It's gonna be pretty late over there, isn't it?
Right, it'll be like 3 a.m, so you just be sleeping otherwise, right?
Right. Oh, sorry.
But they have really good coffee, so.
Just set the alarm. Just set the alarm clock.
But, no,
Good
so
architecture.
I hate missing the meeting, and I really do. And you're right, I forgot about the time change. Forget it.
Okay.
I may be touring the palace.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
That's
this
a
is
great
Nancy
start. So
McCann.
enjoy it. So that was
I think I heard Nancy McCann. Did I hear Nancy McCann?
I did. I do have some comments about the EFLA amendments that I shared with Mr. Fields today, particularly in light of a rather interesting EFLA meeting we had at the Board of Appeals just last night. And the Planning Board doesn't often deal with EFLAs. So I did share my concerns about the amendments with Mr. Fields today. So perhaps rather than taking your time tonight, I believe he just said that he was preparing some additional information or perhaps some modifications for the next meeting. So if I could just reserve an opportunity to speak on the EFLA, unless you want to hear it tonight, I'm happy to reserve that until your next meeting.
No, we'll be happy to let you talk at the next meeting when we bring that subject up. Just if you don't mind, Attorney McKeon, that'd be fine.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn tonight's meeting.
Is there a second?
I'll
Second.
second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Hey. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.